In 1990, one retail empire controlled 25% of America's entire toy market. One out of every 4 toys sold in this country passed through their hands. They operated 1,500 stores across the globe. Annual revenue at peak, $13.9 billion. The company's name was so synonymous with toys that an entire generation grew up believing there was no other place to buy them. Toys R Us wasn't just a store, it was childhood itself. Walk into any suburban mall from Seattle to Miami in 1994, and you'd find it. Those massive big box stores with ceiling-high shelves stacked with every imaginable toy. The backwards R on the sign, designed to look like a child wrote it. Jeffrey the Giraffe smiling from the windows. Parents pushing oversized shopping carts down aisles that seemed to stretch forever. And behind those walls, invisible to customers, the machinery. Distribution centers the size of football stadiums. Warehouses processing millions of packages. Conveyor systems moving 40 million toys. Every Christmas. An infrastructure so powerful it could deliver any toy to any store faster than any competitor in America. They had Star Wars action figures before anyone else. Cabbage Patch Kids when they were impossible to find anywhere. Nintendo systems on launch day when other stores had waiting lists. Every Barbie ever made. Every G.I. Joe. Every Power Ranger. They turned toy shopping from a seasonal Christmas ritual into a year-round destination. They created the category killer, a retail concept so dominant it destroyed every competitor in its category. Mom-and-pop toy stores couldn't compete. Department stores abandoned toys entirely. By the mid-1980s, if you wanted a toy, you went to Toys R Us. There was no second choice. Then, something went catastrophically wrong. September 18th, 2017. Bankruptcy. March 15th, 2018. Liquidation. 33,000 employees lose their jobs. 800 stores shuttered in 18 months. Distribution centers in New Jersey, California, Texas, Georgia, Maryland, Illinois, and Missouri. Facilities that once moved 40 million toys every single Christmas go dark. Parking lots empty. Conveyor belts silent. The company that once accounted for 20% of all toy sales in America closes every single store. Not some stores. All stores. The last national toy retailer. Gone. This is the story of how a World War II veteran named Charles Lazarus turned his father's bicycle repair shop into America's first category killer empire. How supermarket-style warehousing and relentless distribution efficiency created a network so powerful it supplied toys to a quarter of the planet. And how Wall Street private equity firms loaded that empire with $5.3 billion in debt, extracted $470 million in fees, and walked away while 33,000 workers got $60 each. $60. Let that number sink in. This isn't just about toys disappearing from shelves. This isn't about Amazon disrupting retail or kids preferring iPads to action figures. This is about what happens when financial engineers prioritize quarterly extraction over long-term survival. When spreadsheets replace vision. When debt service consumes every dollar that should have gone to competing with the future. It's the story of an empire that didn't die from competition. It was killed by its own owners. Systematically, deliberately, profitably. Welcome inside the silent warehouses where Jeffrey the Giraffe once ruled. Where America's childhood dreams were built, distributed, and destroyed. Where the machinery still stands, but the purpose is gone. This is the rise, fall, and execution of Toys R Us. Charles Philip Lazarus was born October 4th, 1923, in Washington, D.C., to a Jewish family who owned a bicycle repair shop. His father, Frank Lazarus, bought broken bicycles, fixed them in the basement of their home, and resold them. Young Charles watched his father work. He asked once why they didn't sell new bicycles instead. His father's answer stayed with him for the rest of his life. "We can't compete with the chain stores. They can sell new bikes for less than we can buy them." That lesson about scale, about purchasing power, about the brutal economics of small business versus large, would shape everything Charles Lazarus built. He didn't start out planning to revolutionize retail. In 1941, at 18, he joined the US Army. World War II was spreading across Europe. Lazarus served as a cryptographer, breaking codes, finding patterns in chaos, looking for signals in noise. That training, that systematic way of seeing problems, would matter later. But in 1945, when he came home at age 22, he wasn't thinking about business empires. He was thinking about survival. America in 1948 was full of young veterans starting families. The baby boom was beginning. Charles Lazarus, 25 years old, saw an opportunity. He borrowed $2,000 from a bank, combined it with $2,000 he'd saved. $4,000 total. He rented his father's former bicycle shop, the same basement where he'd grown up watching broken bikes get fixed. The address was 2461 18th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. Today, it's a blues bar called Madam's Organ. Then, it was the birthplace of an empire. Lazarus opened Children's Bargain Town. Baby furniture, cribs, high chairs, strollers, playpens. The young couples flooding back from the war needed places to put their babies. Business was decent. Not spectacular, but decent. And then something happened that changed everything. A mother came into the store angry. Her child had broken a doll. She wanted a replacement. Lazarus didn't sell toys. He sold furniture. But he started paying attention. Parents came back for toys constantly. They bought one crib, one high chair, one playpen, but they kept returning for new toys. Their children got bored, wanted something different, needed the latest thing. In Lazarus's own words, recorded decades later, "Parents don't buy another crib or another high chair or playpen as their family grew, but they did buy toys for each child." Think about that for a second. The entire business model that would create a billion-dollar empire came from noticing what customers kept coming back for, not what made the most profit per item, what brought them through the door repeatedly. Toys weren't just products, they were recurring revenue. By the early 1950s, Lazarus had begun stocking more toys, less furniture. The pivot was gradual, but irreversible. Parents wanted toys, more than they wanted baby furniture. The math was simple. Within a few years, Children's Bargain Town was predominantly a toy store. In 1957, Lazarus made the final leap. He opened a new store in Rockville, Maryland, dedicated exclusively to toys. He needed a name. The original name was going to be Children's Supermart, or something similar, focused on the supermarket concept he was copying. But there was a problem. The highway. Sign couldn't fit that many letters, so he shortened it. Toys R Us, and then he added a touch that would become iconic. He flipped the R backwards, making it look like a child had written it. Deliberate, calculated. A signal that this wasn't a serious grown-up store. It was a place where childhood ruled. 25 years old in 1948. $2,000 in savings. A bicycle repair shop in his father's basement. By 1957, he owned multiple stores and had created a brand that would become synonymous with childhood in America. 9 years from broke veteran to retail innovator. But Lazarus wasn't thinking about empires in 1957. He was thinking about surviving the first year. What he couldn't see, what nobody could see, was that his cryptographer's mind, trained to find patterns in chaos during the war, was about to solve a problem the entire retail industry hadn't figured out. He was about to invent something that would change American shopping forever. By 1966, everything had changed. In 1957, Charles Lazarus stood in a supermarket in Rockville, Maryland, and saw the future of retail. Not groceries, toys. The supermarket model was spreading across America in the 1950s. Self-service, long aisles, products stacked high on shelves, shopping carts so customers could buy more than they could carry. No salespeople hovering, no pressure, just abundance. Pick what you want, put it in your cart, check out. The efficiency was revolutionary. Lazarus looked at those supermarkets and asked a question nobody else in the toy business was asking. Why not toys? Traditional toy stores were small, limited selection. Seasonal, they made most of their money in November and December, then barely survived the rest of the year. Department stores sold toys, but only as a side business, tucked into a corner during the holidays. Mom and pop shops carried maybe 500 items. If they didn't have what you wanted, you were out of luck. Lazarus built something different. Long, warehouse-style aisles. Shelves reaching toward the ceiling, packed with inventory. 18,000 different toys in a single store. Let that number sink in. 18,000. Every action figure, every doll, every board game, every bicycle model. If it existed, Toys R Us had it. And if a customer came in looking for something specific, a particular Barbie, a specific model car, the store had it in stock. Always. The promise was simple. We have everything, all the time, at the best price. The pricing strategy was brilliant and brutal. Lazarus used loss leaders. He'd sell the hottest toys at cost, sometimes even below cost, just to get people through the door. In 1977, an electronic game called Simon became the must-have toy of the season. Supply was tight. Some stores charged $30 or more, exploiting the shortage. Lazarus sold it for under $20. He lost money on every unit. Didn't matter. Parents came to Toys R Us for Simon, saw the massive selection and low prices on everything else, and filled their carts. The loss leader paid for itself 10 times over. But the real innovation wasn't the product or the pricing. It was the calendar. Lazarus turned toys from a seasonal business into a year-round operation. Department stores set up toy sections in October, sold through Christmas, then dismantled everything in January. Toys R Us never closed, never cleared the shelves. Birthday in March, Toys R Us. Reward for good grades in May, Toys R Us. Rainy Saturday in July, Toys R Us. The consistency created a psychological shift. Parents started thinking of Toys R Us as the default, the only place. The impact on competitors was immediate and catastrophic. Mom-and-pop toy stores couldn't match the selection. Department stores couldn't compete on price. Seasonal toy shops couldn't survive the slow months. One by one, they closed. By the mid-1960s, Lazarus operated 4 stores in the Washington, D.C. area. Revenue, $12 million annually. Not bad for a guy who started with $4,000 in a basement. In 1966, Lazarus made a decision that would temporarily derail everything. He sold Toys R Us to Interstate Stores, a discount department store chain, for $7.5 million in cash. He stayed on as head of the toy division. The deal made sense on paper. Interstate had capital. Lazarus had a proven concept. Interstate could fund expansion. Lazarus could focus on operations. Partnership. It should have worked. But Interstate's executives didn't understand the toy business. They didn't understand Lazarus's model. And within 8 years, their mismanagement would push the entire company into bankruptcy. The category killer had been invented. And once you create a category killer, there's only one possible outcome for everyone else. They die. But first, the empire would have to survive bankruptcy. By 1974, Interstate Stores was hemorrhaging money, drowning in bad decisions, and dragging Toys R Us down with it. Interstate had seemed like a smart buyer in 1966. They operated discount department stores across the country. They had capital. They had distribution networks. They had ambitions to become the next Walmart or Kmart. But ambition without execution is just noise. Interstate's management made one catastrophic decision after another. They expanded too fast, opened stores in markets they didn't understand, mismanaged inventory, bled cash. By 1974, the numbers were devastating. Interstate had grown to 47 Toys R Us locations, which were generating $130 million in annual profit. Not revenue, profit. The toy division was printing money. Meanwhile, the parent company had lost $92 million. The discount stores were failing. The expansion strategy had collapsed. Interstate filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Read those numbers again. The toy division made $130 million, while the parent company burned through $92 million. Toys R Us wasn't the problem. It was the solution. But bankruptcy doesn't care about which division is profitable. The entire company goes down together. Interstate's creditors looked at the wreckage and saw one asset worth saving: the toy stores. In 1975, they made Charles Lazarus CEO of the entire Interstate company. Not just the toy division, everything. His job was simple and brutal: strip the company for parts and save what could be saved. Lazarus sold off Interstate's discount stores, liquidated the dead weight, closed unprofitable locations, focused everything on toys. For 3 years, he performed corporate triage, cutting away everything that wasn't essential. By 1978, Interstate had been reorganized and renamed. The discount stores were gone. The failed expansion was over. What emerged from bankruptcy was a standalone company, Toys R Us Incorporated. The company went public in 1978. 72 stores, $349 million in sales, $36 million in profit. Market share, 5% of the American toy market. Charles Lazarus, now 55 years old, was CEO of a public company built on the ruins of someone else's failure. What happened next was explosive. Between 1978 and 1983, Toys R Us's net earnings grew at an annual rate of 40%. 40%. Year after year after year. The store count climbed to 169. Market share jumped from 5% to 12.5%. Wall Street noticed. The Los Angeles Times called Toys R Us one of the New York Stock Exchange's hottest stocks. The model was working exactly as Lazarus had designed it. Massive selection, loss leader pricing, year-round operations. But now, with bankruptcy in the rearview mirror and public capital fueling expansion, the company could scale like never before. New stores opened at a relentless pace. 236 stores in 1983 alone. The category killer was becoming a national empire. Competitors couldn't adapt. Child World filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1992. Lionel Leisure collapsed. Kids Central, operated by Service Merchandise, closed completely in 1993. The pattern was always the same. A regional toy chain would try to compete, realize it couldn't match Toys R Us's scale or pricing, and slowly suffocate. There was no second place in this business. Dominate or die. Bankruptcy reveals who's essential. Interstate disappeared. Its discount stores, its expansion strategy, its corporate ambitions, all gone. What survived was the one thing that actually worked: the toy stores. The model Lazarus built from a bicycle repair shop in 1948. 6 years from bankruptcy filing to market dominance. That's not luck. That's proof. By 1980, Wall Street analysts were calling Charles Lazarus a retail genius. Forbes was writing profiles. Business schools were studying the model, and Lazarus, who'd started with $4,000 in a basement, was now running a company that would soon become the most powerful force in the American toy industry. The empire was rising, and nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed capable of stopping it. In 1990, if you wanted to buy a toy in America, there was a 1 in 4 chance you bought it at Toys R Us, 25% of the entire American toy market, 1,300 stores worldwide. The backwards R was as recognizable as the Golden Arches. Geoffrey the Giraffe had become a cultural icon, appearing in commercials, on billboards, waving from store windows. The jingle was inescapable. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. Every parent knew it. Every child sang it. The brand had transcended retail. It had become part of American childhood itself. The numbers at peak were staggering. By 1989, Toys R Us generated $4.7 billion in annual sales from a $13 billion US toy market. The peak would come later, 2011, with revenue hitting $13.9 billion. But the dominance was already absolute in the early 90s. Walk into any major city in America, and Toys R Us was there. Often, multiple locations, the big blue and red signs, the massive parking lots packed with minivans. Inside, parents pushed oversized carts while children ran ahead, pointing at displays. The global expansion was relentless. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush attended the opening of the first Toys R Us in Japan, alongside Charles Lazarus. Think about that. The President of the United States showing up to a toy store opening. That's not just retail success. That's geopolitical significance. Toys R Us wasn't just selling toys. It was exporting American consumer culture. But the real power wasn't in the stores. It was behind them. The distribution empire. 16 distribution centers across North America. Massive facilities, each one processing inventory for dozens of stores. A single distribution center could be nearly 1 million square feet. 50 receiving doors. 56 shipping doors. 16 rail docks. Trucks arriving and departing constantly. During Christmas, one facility alone would ship 40 million toys in 8 weeks. 40 million. Let that number sink in. That's the logistical infrastructure that made parents believe Toys R Us would always have what their kids wanted. Each store carried 18,000 different SKUs, stock keeping units, individual products. If you wanted a specific Barbie, a particular Lego set, a certain action figure, Toys R Us had it. The inventory management was extraordinary. The company used computerized systems, advanced for the time, to track what was selling, what was sitting, what needed to be reordered. Lazarus, the former cryptographer, had built data systems that gave Toys R Us a decisive advantage. They knew what customers wanted before customers knew themselves. The loss leader strategy had been perfected. Diapers sold at near cost to bring parents through the door. Once inside, they'd see the toys, the selection, the prices that seemed reasonable compared to department stores, and they'd buy. Cart after cart. The diapers lost money. The toys made it back 20 times over. Manufacturers loved Toys R Us. The company had so much purchasing power that toy makers would run new products by them before committing to full production. If Toys R Us said a toy would sell, manufacturers believed it. The retail giant had become the gatekeeper of the entire industry. No toy succeeded without Toys R Us's blessing. No manufacturer could afford to lose their shelf space. Charles Lazarus, now in his 70s, was on magazine covers. Business schools taught case studies about the Toys R Us model. Retail analysts called it the perfect category killer, a company so dominant in its space that competition was essentially impossible. The market had been conquered. The infrastructure was unmatched. The brand was beloved. This was the moment when everything worked. The distribution centers hummed with activity. The stores stayed packed. The stock price climbed. Jeffrey the Giraffe smiled from every commercial. Parents told their children, "We'll go to Toys R Us this weekend." And the children's faces lit up. The empire had been built on supermarket efficiency and relentless execution. And it seemed, to everyone watching, to Wall Street, to the business press, to Lazarus himself, invincible. In 1994, Charles Lazarus stepped down as CEO after 46 years. He remained chairman for 4 more years, then retired in 1998. He'd built an empire from $4,000. He'd survived bankruptcy. He'd dominated an entire industry. He was 75 years old. Time to let someone else run it. The man who replaced him wasn't the founder. He hadn't built the company from nothing. He hadn't survived the interstate bankruptcy. He hadn't invented the category killer model. He was a professional executive, competent, experienced, but he wasn't Charles Lazarus. And that's when the cracks started showing. Not immediately, not obviously, but beneath the surface, while everyone celebrated the peak, the foundation was beginning to rot. The world was changing. Walmart was growing. The internet was emerging. And Toys R Us, comfortable in its dominance, missed every signal. In 1998, something happened that should have been impossible. Walmart became America's largest toy retailer. Not Toys R Us, Walmart. The shift was sudden and brutal. In 1990, Toys R Us controlled 25% of the toy market. By 1998, that share had fallen to 16.8%. Walmart had climbed to 17.4%. The gap was small, less than 1 percentage point, but the symbolism was catastrophic. For the first time in decades, Toys R Us was not the dominant force in American toy retail. The category killer had been dethroned. Walmart's advantage was structural. They sold everything: groceries, clothes, electronics, household goods, and toys. A parent could buy diapers, milk, school supplies, and a birthday present in one trip. Toys R Us required a separate visit, a dedicated excursion. The convenience factor was decisive. More importantly, Walmart had perfected supply chain management. Their logistics were more efficient. Their purchasing power was larger. They could undercut Toys R Us on price for the exact same products. The loss leader strategy that Lazarus had pioneered was now being used against his own company, and Walmart had deeper pockets. Target was doing the same thing, expanding their toy sections, offering competitive prices, providing the same one-stop shopping convenience as Walmart. Between the two mega retailers, Toys R Us was being squeezed. The old advantages, massive selection, year-round availability, mattered less when customers could buy toys while grocery shopping at lower prices. Operating margins were collapsing. In 1990, Toys R Us had margins above 12%. By 1997, they'd fallen to 8%. Revenue growth had stalled. The stock price was flat. Wall Street was losing confidence. And then the internet arrived. In 1998, Toys R Us launched ToysRUs.com. The timing seemed perfect. E-commerce was exploding, and the company that owned toy retail should naturally dominate online. But the 1999 Christmas season became a disaster. The website crashed repeatedly. Orders weren't processed. Toys didn't ship on time. Parents who'd ordered gifts weeks in advance got emails in December saying delivery wouldn't happen until January. The failures made national news. The Toys R Us brand, built on reliability and selection, had just demonstrated spectacular incompetence in the most public way possible. In 2000, Toys R Us made a decision that seemed logical at the time. They partnered with Amazon. Amazon would handle the online sales. Toys R Us would be the exclusive toy seller on Amazon's platform. 10-year deal. Amazon got expertise in toys. Toys R Us got Amazon's technology and logistics. Win-win. Except Amazon didn't honor the exclusivity. Third-party sellers flooded the platform with toys. Toys R Us complained. Amazon claimed Toys R Us wasn't carrying a wide enough selection to justify exclusivity. The partnership deteriorated. In 2006, Toys R Us sued Amazon for breach of contract. They won. In 2009, they were awarded $51 million in damages, about half of what they'd requested. But the damage to the business was already done. Years wasted. The online marketplace had evolved without them. Amazon had learned everything it needed about toy retail and no longer needed Toys R Us at all. Meanwhile, the physical stores were deteriorating. Shelves became cluttered. Inventory management slipped. Customer service, never a strength, got worse. The stores felt dated, dirty, overwhelming in a bad way. Not the exciting abundance of the 1980s, but chaotic mess. Parents who'd grown up loving Toys R Us started avoiding it. The experience wasn't worth the hassle when they could buy the same toy at Target or order it online. In 2001, trying to recapture the magic, Toys R Us opened a flagship store in Times Square, New York. The centerpiece was a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel, a life-size Barbie dollhouse, a T-Rex animatronic. It was spectacular. It was also astronomically expensive to operate. The rent alone was crushing. The flagship generated publicity, but not profit. It was a monument to what Toys R Us used to be, not what it was becoming. It should have been a flashing red alarm. Market share falling. Margins compressing. The Christmas 1999. Website disaster. The Amazon partnership failing. Stores looking shabby. Every signal pointed in the same direction. Adapt or die. Invest in e-commerce. Renovate stores. Improve the customer experience. Match Walmart and Target on convenience and price. But none of that happened. Not at the scale required. Not with the urgency required. Instead, in 2004, the board of directors made a different decision. They put the company up for sale. After decades of independence, after surviving, Interstate's bankruptcy, after building a global empire. Toys R Us decided it couldn't compete anymore. The founder was gone. The model was under assault. The solution, apparently, was to find a buyer. The signals were everywhere. Market share eroding. Competitors gaining ground. Technology disrupting everything. But in boardrooms filled with executives who'd never built anything from scratch, surrounded by the comfort of past success, nobody wanted to see the cliff ahead. And that's when Wall Street arrived with an offer. On March 17, 2005, Toys R Us announced it had reached an agreement to sell itself for $6.6 billion. The buyers were a consortium of three firms: Bain Capital, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, known as KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust. Bain and KKR were private equity giants. Vornado was a real estate investment firm. Together, they would take Toys R Us private, removing it from public stock markets. The press release was optimistic. The CEO praised the deal. Wall Street called it a successful conclusion to the company's strategic review. Here's what the press release didn't emphasize: the structure of the deal. Total purchase price, $6.6 billion. Sounds enormous. But the three buyers only contributed $1.3 billion of their own money, 20%. The other $5.3 billion, 80% of the purchase price, was debt. Borrowed money, and that debt wasn't the responsibility of Bain, KKR, or Vornado. It was loaded directly onto Toys R Us itself. Read that again. The company was forced to borrow the money for its own purchase. Toys R Us bought itself and got stuck with the bill. This is how leveraged buyouts work. Private equity firms use massive debt to acquire companies, but the debt obligation falls on the acquired company, not the buyers. If the company thrives, private equity reaps the rewards. If the company collapses under the debt, private equity's exposure is limited. The risk transfers down. Always down. Before the buyout, Toys R Us had $2.3 billion in existing debt and $2.2 billion in cash reserves. Manageable. After the buyout, total debt ballooned to $5.2 billion. The annual interest payments alone were between $400 and $500 million every year. That's more than the company spent on its website and store improvements combined. The deal closed in July 2005. The stock, which had been publicly traded since 1978, stopped trading. Toys R Us was now private. No more quarterly earnings calls. No more transparency. Just 3 private equity firms and a mountain of debt. On the same day the deal closed, Bain, KKR, and Vornado entered into an advisory agreement with Toys R Us. The terms were straightforward. Toys R Us would pay the 3 firms $15 million annually for advisory services. That fee would increase by 5% every year. $15 million in year 1. $15.75 million in year 2. The fees compounded. Then there were transaction fees. In 2005, Toys R Us paid $81 million in fees related to the debt incurred for the buyout. $81 million on day 1, before a single operational improvement had been made. The CEO at the time of the buyout, John Eiler, received $65.3 million in compensation upon the deal's completion. The executives who sold the company were taken care of. The workers who staffed the stores and distribution centers got nothing except new owners and crushing debt. Think about what this means in practice. Toys R Us was competing against Walmart, Target, and Amazon. Those competitors were investing billions in supply chain improvements, store renovations, and e-commerce platforms. Walmart was building state-of-the-art distribution centers. Amazon was perfecting algorithms. Target was remodeling stores to appeal to younger shoppers. Toys R Us was spending $500 million a year on interest payments. Before the buyout, the company had resources, cash reserves, the ability to invest, to adapt, to fight. After the buyout, every available dollar went to servicing debt. Store renovations were delayed. Technology upgrades were postponed. Marketing budgets were slashed. The website remained clunky and slow. The distribution network, once the company's greatest strength, couldn't be modernized because there was no capital. The debt-to-EBITDA ratio, a measure of how much debt a company carries relative to its earnings, was 7.5 times. Anything above 5 is considered dangerously high. Toys R Us was at 7.5. The company was leveraged to the breaking point. Between 2005 and 2017, Toys R Us paid its private equity owners $470 million in fees, interest, and other payments. $470 million. Meanwhile, cash reserves shriveled from $2.2 billion to $301 million. The company was being drained. Systematically, legally. This wasn't a turnaround strategy. This wasn't an investment in the future. This was extraction. Private equity's model depends on debt. They borrow heavily to buy companies, use the company's own cash flow to pay down the debt, and hope to sell the company at a profit within 5 to 7 years. Sometimes it works. The company thrives. Debt gets paid down. Private equity exits wealthy. But if the company struggles, if market conditions worsen, if competitors move faster, the debt becomes a noose. Toys R Us was already struggling when Bain, KKR, and Vornado bought it. That's why it was for sale. Market share was falling. Walmart and Amazon were dominant. The company needed investment, innovation, and agility. Instead, it got $5.3 billion in debt and an annual interest bill that consumed every resource that should have gone to competing. In one signature, the company went from viable to doomed. For the next 12 years, Toys R Us would try to survive with a noose around its neck. Every strategy, every plan, every attempt to adapt was constrained by one simple fact. The debt, payments never stopped. $500 million a year, every year, no matter what. The machinery of destruction had been set in motion, and the men who built it would walk away wealthy. Between 2005 and 2017, Toys R Us paid its private equity owners $470 million, while its ability to compete evaporated. The debt service was relentless, $400 to $500 million every single year. No exceptions, no relief. Revenue stayed flat or declined, hovering around $11 to $11.5 billion annually, well below the peak of $13.9 billion. In 2013, sales dropped to $11.2 billion. The company was shrinking while competitors grew. The stores were deteriorating. Walk into a Toys R Us in 2010 and compare it to one from 1990. The difference was obvious. Cluttered aisles, products stacked haphazardly, shelves that needed dusting, floors that needed cleaning. The magic was gone. What used to feel like a kingdom of abundance now felt like a warehouse going out of business. Customer service had always been weak. Toys R Us built its model on selection and price, not service. But by the 2000s, it was a liability. Employees couldn't answer questions, couldn't find products, seemed demoralized. Parents noticed. The experience of shopping at Toys R Us became something to endure, not enjoy. The website was a disaster, slow, difficult to navigate, limited inventory compared to Amazon, no same-day delivery, no subscription service. Competitors were offering 2-day shipping, easy returns, personalized recommendations. Toys R Us was stuck in 2005 while the world moved to 2015. Store renovations were postponed year after year. The capital wasn't there. Maintenance was deferred. Paint faded. Signage cracked. The buildings showed their age. A typical big box Toys R Us from the 1990s needed millions in updates to compete in the 2010s. That money went to debt payments instead. The distribution network, once the company's crown jewel, couldn't keep pace with Amazon's. Speed. Amazon was building fulfillment centers within miles of major population centers, enabling same-day and next-day delivery. Toys R Us distribution centers were designed for a different era. Bulk shipments to stores, not individual packages to homes. The infrastructure was obsolete, and there was no capital to rebuild it. Marketing budgets shrank. Fewer commercials. Less brand presence. Geoffrey the Giraffe appeared less frequently. The "I don't want to grow up" jingle, once unavoidable, faded from the airwaves. Younger parents, millennials with their own children, didn't have the same nostalgic connection. Toys R Us was losing cultural relevance. In 2010, desperate for capital, Toys R Us attempted an initial public offering to escape the private equity structure and reduce debt. The IPO would have allowed them to raise money, pay down some of the crushing obligations, and regain flexibility. It failed. Market conditions were blamed. The IPO was withdrawn in 2013. The debt remained. In 2014, the company announced a TRU transformation strategy. The plan sounded ambitious. Fix store layouts, improve customer experience, better integrate online and physical retail, clearer pricing. But transformation requires investment. store remodels, technology upgrades, hiring, training. All of that costs money. And Toys R Us didn't have money. It had debt payments. Here's the brutal irony. In 2017, Toys R Us still controlled 20% of the US toy market. 1 out of every 5 toys sold. No company should file bankruptcy with that market share. But they did. The reported operating loss in 2017 was $29 million. Not $500 million. Not $1 billion. $29 million. Now consider this. The annual debt service was $500 million. Subtract the debt, and Toys R Us was profitable. The company wasn't failing operationally. It was being crushed financially. Amazon was spending billions building distribution infrastructure. Walmart was perfecting inventory algorithms. Target was remodeling stores to attract younger families. Toys R Us was spending $500 million a year on interest payments to the firms that bought it. The comparison is stark. Amazon built. Walmart innovated. Target adapted. Bain, KKR, and Vornado extracted. They created nothing, improved nothing, built nothing. They bought a struggling company, loaded it with debt, collected fees, and watched it suffocate. Internal financial documents, revealed later in bankruptcy proceedings, showed that Toys R Us had the operational revenue to compete. They knew what needed to be done. Store investments, e-commerce improvements, supply chain modernization. The strategies existed. The expertise existed. What didn't exist was capital. Every dollar that should have gone to competing with the future went to servicing the past. Former executives testified after the bankruptcy that the company was constrained by financing costs, not consumer demand. The market was there. Parents still bought toys. Children still wanted them. But parents bought them at Target, Walmart, and Amazon because those companies had invested in making the shopping experience better, faster, easier. Toys R Us couldn't compete because it was bleeding out financially. The private equity owners, meanwhile, continued collecting management fees, advisory fees, transaction fees, regardless of performance, regardless of store conditions, regardless of employee morale. The fees were contractual. They got paid first. The company wasn't dying from Amazon. It was being bled dry by its own balance sheet. And in 2017, the blood ran out. On September 6, 2017, CNBC reported that Toys R Us was considering bankruptcy. Within days, the company was dead. The report triggered panic. Suppliers who'd been shipping toys on credit, standard practice in retail, immediately demanded cash up front. Vendors who'd extended payment terms for decades suddenly wanted money before they'd ship another box. The liquidity crisis was instant. Toys R Us needed approximately $1 billion in cash just to stock shelves for the upcoming Christmas season. They didn't have it. 12 days later, on September 18, 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. The company claimed this was a reorganization, not a liquidation. They planned to keep stores open, continue operations, and emerge from bankruptcy leaner and stronger. The debt would be restructured. The business model would be fixed. This was supposed to be a strategic reset. It wasn't. The 2017 holiday season was catastrophic. The IT systems, already outdated, crashed repeatedly under Christmas traffic. Stores couldn't process transactions. The website failed during peak shopping hours. Suppliers, nervous about the bankruptcy, refused to ship hot toys on credit. Shelves that should have been packed with the season's must-have items sat empty. Parents came looking for specific toys and left frustrated. Sales collapsed. By January 2018, reality became unavoidable. Toys R Us announced it would close 180 stores, roughly 20% of its footprint. The company framed this as necessary pruning. Close the underperformers, strengthen the survivors. But internally, executives knew the truth. They were running out of runway. Lenders who'd provided financing during bankruptcy were losing confidence. The company couldn't meet its projections. The death spiral had begun. On March 15, 2018, Toys R Us announced the liquidation of all remaining U.S. stores. Not some stores, all stores. 800 locations, 33,000 employees. The reorganization had failed. Buyers had been sought, but none materialized. The lenders had pulled the plug. Toys R Us would be dismantled and sold for parts. The human cost was immediate and brutal. 33,000 workers were laid off. Many had worked at Toys R Us for decades. Store managers with 30 years of service. Warehouse workers who'd been there since the 1980s. Distribution center employees who'd processed millions of toys over decades of Christmases. They were told their jobs were gone. Worse, they were told there would be no severance. Toys R Us had a severance policy dating back to 2002. 2 weeks of pay for the first year of employment, then 1 additional week for every year after that. A worker with 20 years should have received 22 weeks of severance. A worker with 30 years should have received 32 weeks. The policy was clear. The expectation was established. But severance payments are classified as unsecured debt in bankruptcy. Low priority. When a company liquidates, secured creditors get paid first. Banks, bondholders, lenders, then administrative costs. Then, if anything remains, unsecured creditors. Employees rank near the bottom. In the Toys R Us liquidation, there wasn't enough money. The severance was voided. 33,000 workers got nothing. Meanwhile, just before the bankruptcy filing, executives had received $8.2 million in bonuses, performance incentives, retention payments. The leadership team that presided over the collapse was compensated. The workers who'd built the brand got nothing. The bankruptcy lawyers, Kirkland and Ellis, representing Toys R Us, collected $56 million in fees. $56 million for managing the liquidation, for processing the bankruptcy, for dismantling the company. The legal team made more than the entire workforce combined. Former employees organized. A worker named Anne Marie Reinhardt, who'd been with Toys R Us for 29 years, filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all laid-off workers. She requested that severance be treated as administrative claims, higher priority in bankruptcy proceedings. The case made headlines. Protests were organized. Lawmakers sent letters to Bain, KKR, and Vornado, demanding they contribute to a hardship fund. Under FIUNSACIT pressure, in November 2018, Bain Capital and KKR established a $20 million fund for former workers. Not Vornado, just Bain and KKR. 20 million sounds substantial until you divide it among 33,000 people. The fund was voluntary. Not all workers qualified. The amount each person received varied based on tenure and need. In June 2019, a bankruptcy judge approved a separate $2 million settlement for workers who'd been explicitly promised severance at the start of the bankruptcy. That settlement covered about 33,000 former employees. $2 million divided by 33,000 people equals roughly $60 each. $60. For years of service. For loyalty. For building Jeffrey the Giraffe into a cultural icon. Think about those numbers. Bankruptcy lawyers, $56 million. Executives, $8.2 million in bonuses. Private equity firms over 12 years, $470 million extracted. Workers, $60 each, or nothing. The last. Stores closed on June 30th, 2018. The liquidation sales. Everything must go. Massive discounts. Attracted bargain hunters, but not nostalgia. The shelves emptied. The signs came down. Jeffrey the giraffe disappeared. Parents brought their children to say goodbye, taking photos in front of stores that had defined their own childhoods. The emotions were real. The loss was genuine. Suppliers lost hundreds of millions in trade credit. Vendors who'd shipped inventory expecting payment got pennies on the dollar in the settlement. The ripple effects spread through the toy industry. Smaller manufacturers who'd relied on Toys R Us orders struggled. Some went bankrupt themselves. 18 months. From bankruptcy filing to complete liquidation. 70 years of history. Gone. March 15th, 2018 was the day the last national toy retailer died. Not because toys became unpopular. Not because children stopped wanting them. Not even because Amazon offered free shipping. Because Wall Street loaded a viable company with unsustainable debt and extracted every possible dollar before the corpse hit the floor. And then Charles Lazarus died. On March 22nd, 2018, Charles Lazarus died at age 94. 1 week after Toys R Us announced liquidation. 7 days. That's how long the founder survived after learning his life's work would be completely destroyed. The timing was reported as coincidence. Lazarus was 94. He'd been in declining health. Death at that age isn't unexpected. But the date, exactly 1 week after the liquidation announcement, carried a weight that couldn't be dismissed. He'd built an empire from a bicycle repair shop. He'd survived the interstate bankruptcy. He'd created the category killer model that changed American retail forever. And he lived just long enough to see it end. Lazarus had stepped down as CEO in 1994, after 46 years running the company. He remained chairman until 1998, then retired completely. By the time Bond, KKR, and Vornado bought Toys R Us in 2005, he no longer held any ownership stake. He'd sold his shares, moved on. In 2013, he sold his Manhattan duplex at 965th Avenue for $21 million. He was wealthy, comfortable, removed from day-to-day operations. But he never stopped caring. In 2017, the year of the bankruptcy, Lazarus visited the company's headquarters in New Jersey. Employees who met him said his face still lit up when he talked about toys, about children, about the stores. He was 93 years old, and the business he'd created still mattered to him. He'd given it 7 decades of his life. You don't walk away from that. Not really. The company issued a statement after his death. There have been many sad moments for Toys R Us in recent weeks, and none more heartbreaking than today's news about the passing of our beloved founder. He visited us in New Jersey just last year, and we will forever be grateful for his positive energy, passion for the customer, and love for children everywhere. The words were sincere, but they couldn't hide the tragedy. Charles Lazarus died, knowing that the company he'd built, the model he'd pioneered, the brand he'd made synonymous with childhood, would be gone within months. The stores would close. The distribution centers would go silent. Jeffrey the giraffe would disappear, and 33,000 people, many of whom had spent entire careers at Toys R Us, would lose their jobs with no severance. 70 years. From his father's bicycle repair shop in 1948 to 1,500 stores controlling 25% of the global toy market. From $4,000 borrowed and saved to $13.9 billion in annual revenue at peak. From a single location in Washington, D.C., to distribution centers spanning continents. He'd invented supermarket-style toy retail. He'd created year-round toy shopping. He'd built infrastructure so powerful it could deliver 40 million toys in a single Christmas season, and he watched it die. Lazarus hadn't caused the collapse. He'd retired years before the leveraged buyout. He had no role in the decision to load the company with $5.3 billion in debt. He didn't approve the advisory fees or the extraction strategy. By the time Bain, KKR and Vornado arrived. Charles Lazarus was a bystander, a witness to the murder of his legacy. There's a particular cruelty in that. To build something for 70 years, to survive failures and bankruptcies and competition, to create an empire from nothing, and then to watch, powerless, as people who contributed nothing, built nothing, created nothing, dismantle it for parts and profit. Charles Lazarus transformed American retail. He invented the category killer. He pioneered year-round toy shopping. He created distribution networks so efficient they supplied toys to a quarter of the planet. The men who bought his company in 2005 invented nothing. They created nothing. They extracted $470 million and left 33,000 families with nothing. One man built an empire. 3. Firms destroyed it. History will remember which is which. Lazarus was buried a few days after his death. The funeral was private. By the time of his burial, Toys R Us stores were already beginning liquidation sales. The empire and its emperor died together. He didn't live to see the final store closures in June. He didn't see the bankruptcy court settlements. He didn't see the empty distribution centers or the faded Jeffrey signs. Some might call that mercy. He was spared the final indignity of watching the auction of his life's work. Others might call it heartbreak. The empire builder died with his empire, but at least he didn't see what came next. Today, if you drive past certain industrial parks in New Jersey, Texas, California, Georgia, you'll find them. The warehouses where America's childhood dreams were built, distributed, and destroyed. Frederick, Maryland. 7 Jeffrey Way. A distribution center that once processed toys for 63 stores now sits mostly empty. The EE address still exists. The building still stands. But the purpose is gone. This facility, like the others scattered across America, was part of a distribution empire designed to move toys at a scale nobody had attempted before. Nearly 1 million square feet. 50 receiving doors. 56 shipping doors. 16 rail docks. During peak season, this single location could handle 80 trucks per day. The conveyor systems were automated, technologically advanced for their time. Toys arrived from manufacturers, mostly China, and were sorted, stored, and shipped to stores across the region. At Christmas, the volume was staggering. One distribution center could ship 40 million toys in 8 weeks. 40 million. Think about that logistical complexity. Tracking inventory for 18,000 different SKUs. Coordinating deliveries to dozens of stores. Ensuring the hot toy of the season, whatever it was that year, reached shelves before competitors. The infrastructure wasn't just, impressive. It was the reason Toys R Us dominated for decades. Mount Olive, New Jersey. A 500 to 19,420 square foot regional distribution center, built to supply stores across the Northeast. The specifications were precise: high ceilings for maximum vertical storage, wide aisles for forklift traffic, loading docks positioned for efficient truck rotation. This wasn't a warehouse, it was a machine, and for years, the machine worked flawlessly. At peak, Toys R Us operated 16 distribution centers across North America. Each one fed dozens of stores. The network was the circulatory system of the empire. Toys flowed from ports to distribution centers to stores to children's homes. The system moved billions of dollars in inventory annually. It was Charles Lazarus's cryptographer mind applied to logistics, finding patterns, optimizing routes, eliminating waste. Today, some of these facilities have been repurposed, sold to other companies, converted to different uses. The Mount Olive Center, the Frederick Center, and others like them in California, Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, Texas. Each has a different fate. Some became Amazon fulfillment centers. The supreme irony: The company that helped kill Toys R Us inherited its bones. Jeffrey the Giraffe's distribution empire now ships Alexa devices and diapers ordered online. Other facilities sit partially empty. Leased to multiple tenants, subdivided. The massive open spaces that once held pallets of toys now store generic freight. The automated conveyor systems, cutting edge when installed, are either torn out or sit idle, relics of a different era. The Jeffrey Way address in Frederick remains, but Jeffrey is gone. Drive past these locations today and you'll see the bones of empire. Massive buildings, enormous parking lots, mostly empty, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, faded paint on loading docks. Some have new signs, new company names, new logos. Others just have "for lease" signs, waiting for the next tenant. The workers who made these centers function, forklift operators, inventory managers, logistics coordinators, shipping clerks, are scattered. Some found jobs at Amazon fulfillment centers, often in the same buildings where they used to work for Toys R Us. Some left the logistics industry entirely. Many took pay cuts. The specialized knowledge they'd built over decades, how to move toys efficiently, how to predict seasonal demand, how to manage Christmas chaos, became obsolete overnight. Inside these buildings, during the peak years, the operation was relentless. 3 shifts during Christmas season, trucks arriving constantly, pallets moving through conveyor systems, scanners tracking every box. Workers knew that a delayed shipment meant empty shelves. Empty shelves meant lost sales. Lost sales meant angry parents. The pressure was constant, but the pride was real. These workers were part of the system that made Toys R Us invincible. And then it stopped. 1 million square feet, 60 shipping doors, 40 million toys in 2 months. Let that number sink in. That's the logistical infrastructure that made parents believe Toys R Us would always have what their kids wanted. That infrastructure still exists. The buildings haven't collapsed. The loading docks still function. The square footage hasn't shrunk, but the company that made them necessary is gone. Some of these distribution centers now belong to Amazon. The company that helped kill Toys R Us inherited its infrastructure, its locations, its logistics expertise. Jeffrey the Giraffe's distribution empire is now shipping products for the competitor that accelerated the collapse. That's not irony. That's erasure. The buildings remain. The infrastructure is still there. But the company that built them, the workers who operated them, the purpose that justified their existence, all gone. Buildings can be repurposed. Supply chains can be transferred. Workers can be replaced. But empires can't. Be rebuilt. Not once they've been deliberately destroyed. Not once the machinery has been stripped for parts and sold to the highest bidder. Not once the people who made it work have been scattered to the wind with $60 each and no severance. 7 Jeffrey Way, Frederick, Maryland. The address exists. The building stands. But Jeffrey doesn't live there anymore. So, what did we learn? What lessons can be extracted from this autopsy? Here's what the business schools won't teach you about the death of Toys R Us. Lesson 1. Debt kills more companies than competition. In 2017, when Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy, the company still controlled 20% of the American toy market. 1 out of every 5 toys sold. Think about that. No company should hit bankruptcy with that market share. No business with 20% market dominance should collapse. But they did. The operating loss in 2017 was $29 million. The annual debt service was $500 million. Subtract the debt payments, and Toys R Us was profitable. The company wasn't failing operationally. It was being crushed financially. Amazon didn't kill Toys R Us. Walmart didn't kill Toys R Us. the leveraged buyout killed Toys R Us. $5.3 billion in debt loaded onto the company in 2005. 400 to 500 million in annual interest payments for 12 straight years. Every dollar that should have gone to renovating stores went to Wall Street. Every dollar that should have upgraded the website went to bondholders. Every dollar that should have modernized distribution centers went to servicing loans the company never wanted. If you can't afford to invest in your future because you're paying for yesterday's debts, you're already dead. You just haven't stopped moving yet. Lesson 2. Financial engineering is not the same as building. Charles Lazarus built Toys R Us from $4,000 and a bicycle repair shop. He invented the category killer model. He pioneered year-round toy shopping. He created distribution networks that could deliver 40 million toys in a single Christmas season. He built an empire from nothing over 70 years. Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado bought Toys R Us with borrowed money, loaded the debt onto the company, and extracted $470 million in fees and interest over 12 years. They created nothing. They improved nothing. They built nothing. They optimized spreadsheets while the stores deteriorated. They collected advisory fees while the website failed. They engineered financial structures while competitors invested in the future. There's a difference between owning something and building something. Wall Street understands acquisition. Charles Lazarus understood creation. One leaves behind an empire. The other leaves behind bankruptcy court filings and $60 per worker. You can't extract your way to greatness. You can only extract until there's nothing left to take. And then you walk away. Lesson 3. Workers always pay for executive decisions. 33,000 jobs lost. $60 per worker from the bankruptcy settlement. No severance despite decades of service. Meanwhile, executives received $8.2 million in bonuses. Bankruptcy lawyers collected $56 million in fees. Private equity firms extracted $470 million over 12 years. When the liquidation was announced, former employees discovered that their promised severance had been voided. Bankruptcy law placed private equity investors near the front of the line for recovery. Workers ranked near the bottom. A woman named Anne Marie Reinhardt, who'd worked at Toys R Us for 29 years, filed a class action lawsuit. She fought for severance. She organized protests. She testified before Congress. The result was a $20 million hardship fund from Bain and KKR, not Vornado, and a $2 million settlement for workers. Explicitly promised severance. Divide $2 million by 33,000 people. $60 each. For years of service. For building Jeffrey the Giraffe into a cultural icon. For staffing stores through decades of Christmases. For operating distribution centers that moved billions of dollars in inventory. $60. The executives who presided over the collapse were compensated. The lawyers who processed the bankruptcy made millions. The private equity firms that loaded the company with fatal debt were protected by limited liability. They walked away having lost their initial investment, but having already extracted far more in fees. The workers got nothing, or $60, which is effectively nothing. When companies fail, the people who caused the failure walk away wealthy. The people who built the company, who showed up every day, who believed the promises, who invested their careers, they lose everything. This isn't a flaw in the system. This is the system working, exactly as designed. Lesson 4. Category killers can be killed. Toys R Us invented the category killer model. They dominated toy retail for 50 years. They had brand recognition. They had infrastructure. They had market share. And they were destroyed anyway. Being the biggest doesn't guarantee survival. It just means you have further to fall. Dominance creates complacency. Success breeds arrogance. Market leadership makes you a target. and if you saddle a dominant company with unsustainable debt while competitors invest in innovation, dominance becomes irrelevant. Walmart didn't have $500 million in annual debt service. They invested in supply chains. Target didn't have private equity owners extracting fees. They renovated stores. Amazon didn't have a leveraged buyout strangling capital. They built fulfillment centers. Toys R Us had all the advantages: brand, market share, distribution, experience, and lost anyway because those advantages were neutralized by financial decisions made in boardrooms far removed from toy aisles and distribution centers. Category killers can be killed, and the weapon isn't competition, it's debt. Here's the final truth that nobody wants to say directly. Toys R Us was murdered, not by Amazon, not by changing consumer habits, not by children preferring iPads to action figures, by private equity firms that bought a struggling company, loaded it with catastrophic debt, extracted nearly $500 million, and walked away when the corpse stopped twitching. $470 million extracted. 33,000 families devastated. Distribution centers that once moved 40 million toys per Christmas now sit silent or serve Amazon. The backwards R that looked like a child wrote it is gone from American shopping malls. Geoffrey the giraffe doesn't wave from windows anymore. Charles Lazarus built something that mattered, a place where childhood was celebrated, where parents could find any toy, where the magic of possibility lived in ceiling-high shelves packed with every imaginable wonder. He built it from nothing over 70 years, and it took 12 years of financial extraction to kill it. The next time you hear about a leveraged buyout, remember Geoffrey the giraffe. Remember the 33,000 families. Remember the distribution centers that sit empty. Remember that debt service doesn't care about market share, brand loyalty, or childhood memories. Remember that extraction always prioritizes short-term profit over long-term survival. Because this story isn't over. Private equity is doing this to other companies right now. Sears, Payless, Gymboree. The model works for Wall Street. The formula is proven. Buy with borrowed money. Load the debt onto the target. Extract fees. Optimize until there's nothing left. Walk away before the collapse. It's the workers who pay. It's always the workers who pay. Every retail empire that thinks it's too big to fail should study Toys R Us. 25% market share doesn't protect you from bad decisions and crushing debt. What other companies do you see making the same mistakes right now? What businesses are being hollowed out by leveraged buyouts while pretending everything's fine? Let me know in the comments. If you want more stories about corporate rise and fall, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.